All right, welcome back to Eurodollar University series, digital currencies, crypto. What is really happening in the space? As we talked about in my previous interview with Manny, Rick, and Cruz, there's a lot of progress happening in cryptocurrencies, and we really need to define our terms of cryptocurrencies. But our goal here is really to get some information about what's happening in the space from people who have been living and working in it. And who better to talk to about cryptocurrencies and everything that's happening than with Ryne Saxe, somebody who's been living in digital currencies for pretty much your whole adult career, maybe thinking about all of these detailed discussions and all of the incredible complexities that go into it and as part of your own daily life. And so what we're really attempting to do here is to bridge the divide, get some more information about what's really happening, to cut through all the, frankly, bullshit that goes on about cryptocurrency and see what's really happening, drill down into the real bedrock of progress that's being made, things that are happening, and maybe to really get a better understanding of why there is so much interest in this to begin with. Maybe that's a good place to start, Ryne. What do you think? Cryptocurrency started out as Bitcoin. It seemed like a fad. It seemed like this one little thing that was happening, and then more piled on. And here we are in 2024, and we are at ETH Denver, where there's a whole lot of people here. There's a whole lot of interest around the mainstream, even the mainstream media. We've seen Bitcoin start to get mainstream attention. It's now a Wall Street asset and things like that. So we're actually seeing legitimate demand from not just crypto crazy people. It's really breaking into the mainstream. So this is a long coming progress, a long coming process. What is your perspective on all of that?
It's the most exciting time since I joined the space, I think, for a couple of reasons. Just briefly, thanks for letting me join you. This is my favorite type of conversation. And I love talking to you on any given occasion, but let's do it live this time. So that'll be fun. Okay, so since I came into the space, we've been, from a developer's perspective, we've been waiting on a bunch of things to be built that will make cryptocurrency more accessible, more usable, and ultimately more beneficial for the average person. Ultimately, whether they are specifically interested in crypto or not, I just think about crypto as a fundamentally better way to hold and move money. But you got to build products to prove that to people, right? And so I say it's the most exciting time since I joined the space right now, because in the developer community, there's been a bunch of progress to unlock many of these sort of like mainstream product experiences that people have been waiting for. But also, as you talked about, the mass market is paying closer attention because there have been a few milestone events. The crypto market is hot. There's no denying that right now. But obviously, the Bitcoin ETF approval was a major indicator of broader institutional interest and acceptance of this thing. Several of the funds offering or administering an ETF were sort of Bitcoin deniers 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And have changed tack. Of course, it's because there's money to be made there. But I think at some point in time over the last 5 years, Bitcoin has sort of settled into a fundamental level of acceptance with regard to its place in the market. And I think a lot of institutions have just kind of been late to the game to realize that. But I should say still early overall.
After trying to kill it for so many years, it's obvious it's not going away. And by it, I don't just mean Bitcoin, obviously. It's the entire premise behind digital currencies.
Right.
They've tried time and time again to strangle it in the crib, and it only comes back stronger.
Right.
So there is definitely something there.
100%. It's like a hydra.
Yeah,
basically.
My analogy is it's like the Amazons and the Everglades.
Mm.
Once they were let free, it was like the perfect environment. Now that they've tried to eradicate the snakes, they can't. They just keep growing and growing and growing, get bigger, bigger, bigger.
Totally. I mean, the whole space, it's the open source space in nature, one of the most active I've ever seen. And there's sort of a revenge of the nerds element. I am, with myself being one. And it's just,
I think everybody watching this is some form of monetary nerd. So you're in good company.
Among friends. Yeah.
So you talked about a couple milestones. Could you give us a little bit more detail on what that is?
Yeah, I think there are market milestones and developer milestones that are sort of coincidentally converging at the same time right now. And I couldn't have predicted that even 2 years ago. But on the developer side, it's taken a while, maybe twice as long as I expected, several years back, but especially in the Ethereum community and in some of the alternative blockchains, there's been massive, massive progress to sort of make the friction of just dealing with blockchain to be able to relegate that to the background from a product builder's perspective. And so an end user can use crypto and realize benefits from it without necessarily having to know all about crypto up front. And so you hear buzz terms like account abstraction in the Ethereum community, right? Which most simply doesn't sort of could be leveraged to not require a person to understand the vagaries of a crypto wallet in order to actually be using crypto. You hear things layer 2, layer 3, which takes a bunch of sort of data and transactional activity off the main chain where it gets clogged and expensive and slow and makes it fast and cheap so that when I hit send, the payment can be received as quickly as I would expect from a Web 2 experience, but without a middleman in between. And those are all things we've been waiting on for years. And as a product builder on top of them, finally you can construct a user experience that makes sense to the average person, or at least we're very, very close to getting there. And then on the market side, just the bounce back from FTX, which threw everything off. We all know about that. But just the continued progress fighting through these ETF applications to get to a point of acceptance. And of course, to get to that point of acceptance, you have a bunch of people, sort of talking heads in the market that people trust, suddenly advocating for this technology. And they weren't really able to make sense of it 5 years ago. Maybe it was a little bit too scary and too volatile for them to really speak on behalf of, in the interest of their shareholder base. But now it's popular again, and it's far more accepted. And all of this has happened at once within the bounds of the same sort of stretch of 6 to 8 months. And it's just led to a flourish of, I think, optimism, which the deepest developers never really lose the optimism in the space. But obviously the next wave of adopters are going to go as the market goes. And right now the market goes well with a lot of sort of validation around us. And so I think the space is as bright as it's ever been. And I've been working in it for some time, and I feel as close as we've ever been to being able to offer an end user an intuitive benefit to using cryptocurrency, whether they care that it's crypto or not. And that last phrase, I think, is pretty critical.
Well, that's the holy grail, isn't it? Because once you can closely mimic the experience that anybody has today in their TradFi sense of how they move money and use money and actually pay for things, then it becomes less of a maybe an emotional hurdle.
Totally. There's an analogy I like to use. I believe it's very true. Bitcoin is 15 years old since it first emerged from the darkness on the internet, right? And a lot of people, I think, have expected more from crypto in the last 5, 6, 7 years, right?
I wrote my first article on Bitcoin in 2013.
Yeah.
And I'm still waiting.
And I guess what I would say to that, and what I would argue to people, is it's actually still quite early. And the analogy I really like to use,
I'm impatient,
is so am I.
I know you are too.
And when I started building, some of the things I just talked about, some of the progress I talked about being made. People asked me in 2017 or 18, when do you think these things will be ready? I said 2 years. And it's been 6.
Yeah.
But it's still been steady progress. The analogy I love to use is Bitcoin, or not just Bitcoin, crypto has not had its Netscape moment yet. And so I think, for those of us who are old enough to remember the first time, we heard about email. And if you weren't sort of a deeper user logging in through a terminal, being basically able to participate in message passing online through a terminal on your computer, if you weren't on that level, you were hearing these things about the World Wide Web and email, and it didn't really make sense. It wasn't usable to you, but you understood it was a thing that was coming because the narrative was building. And then finally, Netscape came out and lent sort of a mouse click and a picture to this thing called the internet, which was just so abstract to the mass sort of populace before that point in time. And we haven't had that in blockchain or crypto yet. We're close, though. And I think for those of us who are impatient, myself included, we have to remember that by that point in time, the internet and the World Wide Web were also years old. There was years of open source developer progress to turn into protocol standards to be adopted to ultimately enable the average person to log in and message pass like people had been within academia for a long time. And this feels similarly to me, but there hadn't been that product yet that just shows somebody this is a fundamentally better way to hold and move money, just like the browser showed people this is a fundamentally better way to access information and send messages. But I think we're really, really close. So when I say it's early, I like to have that in mind. the internet didn't really become the internet until the World Wide Web became consumable through a web browser, and AOL came out. You've got mail was marketed to everybody, and ultimately gained a level of adoption really quickly just because it was then so easy to use and so easy to distribute. I think we're a step short of that, but we're really, really close.
Yeah, I think that's one of the mistakes that we make. We have the impression that technology and adoption proceeds at a rapid pace because our perception is we come in at the end.
Yep.
We're at the end of the cycle. We see, like you're saying, the internet kind of just showed up at the end of the 90s and became ubiquitous.
Yep.
So for most people, it was like all of a sudden it happened when there's this long, winding road to get to that point.
Yeah.
But as long as there is, as you said, fundamentally a better idea, then that road continues to move forward. And that's why I think we'll pivot here. You said cryptocurrencies, and we're making blanket statements, so would take that for whatever it is. But it's a fundamentally better way to do money. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to put it is I don't have to trust a bank to confirm my balance, which I'm largely fine doing. Banks are obviously widely accepted in the world. But where that really grates me is when I have to adhere to the limitations that my bank imposes upon me to move my money, right? When something comes up on short notice at 5 p.m. on a Friday, well, then you're hung out to dry, right? When I have to send a transaction abroad and there's an arbitrary $30 fee for a transaction that costs them marginally nothing to confirm with a banking partner. And so those are the things, I think, the more you run into those things, the more frustrated you tend to get. I largely trust my bank to have my balance correct, although there are very high profile examples recently of some of the bigger banks in the US getting those wrong. I'm thinking about the Wells Fargo payroll fiasco a couple months back, right? But I don't really trust my money to move my bank to move my money in the best way. I just kind of like have to deal with it. And if you just want to start there, being able to confirm my balance, own it, and move it at any hour of the day to most anyone in the world, so long as they're not doing something nefarious, is just an expectation over time that I have come to have for my money once money went digital a couple decades ago with online banking.
That's another big point too, is that people don't realize this is nothing new.
Totally. We're already using
a little bit of a new
money.
way of doing it and getting around some of the gates that have been thrown up, but it's fundamentally the same idea.
It is. And I think the starting point to realize for a lot of people is you're already using digital dollars.
Yeah.
Every time you swipe your card and every time you send a bank transfer, we're using digital dollars. There are cryptocurrencies called stablecoins that are just different digital dollars. And they have a really good track record of maintaining their value and keeping it stable. And if you just opt into using that digital dollar, then you can get rid of a lot of the restrictions we tend to run to and frustrate us over time. And all the while, if you're comfortable holding that money in a wallet that you own, it's just like holding money in your wallet, your everyday wallet, cash. You control it and you decide what to do with it. And I think that's actually the best user experience that I've ever had with money. It's just traditional cash. I can hand it over, you accept it, the transaction's confirmed between the two of us, and I can walk away with however much money I still have left in my wallet. And so long as I don't put it on the top of my car when I'm filling up with gas and drive away, it's basically okay. I don't lose it. And I think you can draw that analogy pretty directly to just the ultimate ease of using cryptocurrency once you get used to the wallet experience. And when you combine that with no business hours, fast and cheap transfers, and sort of a network that's agnostic to who I'm sending that money to and where, so long as I'm good for my money, it leads to a user experience that I think is much closer to cash and that many of us would like to have with their digital money today.
And that's another point too, right? The network is agnostic to what you're actually doing, which is something that's going to come up more and more as we continue to navigate this kind of environment that we're in.
Right.
So that's when you're talking about a better way to do money, that is certainly a big part of it too, right?
Yeah, I think it is. Now, obviously in saying that, I'm not implicitly endorsing some nefarious use for sending money around the world.
Yeah, but that's one of those absurd arguments that get thrown up to why can't we use crypto? Because criminals might actually use it, when we all know that criminals mostly use physical U.S. dollars to do their dirty business.
Yeah.
That's just one of the things that the mainstream media and the politicians throw out there because, one of their attempts to throw up gates on crypto.
Yeah. That's been a narrative I've been pretty frustrated to see, because I've persistently hammered, especially in recent years, because I think it honestly just conveniently looks past the relevant data. We've seen articles issued and retracted with wrong data about cryptocurrency being used to actively fund terrorist activities around the world. Certainly, you might look at transactions and find an element of that, just like you would within the banking system. But they've been exaggerated.
Terrorists are going to find a way to finance themselves regardless. And that's, if we have a better system that actually provides tangible benefits,
right?
Why do we care about that little tiny slice? I mean, I'm saying we shouldn't care about terrorism, but that's not a reason to throw out the entire all the benefits that might accrue from a better way of doing money.
Yeah, it's something I really struggle with because it's a new technology that's not super mature yet. It's close to mature from the mainstream perspective. That's why we see something like a Bitcoin ETF. But there's always this push and pull to letting that type of fundamentally better new technology flourish, develop, and mitigating its downside effects for people leveraging it for the wrong reasons. I think that's where you have to control the banking nexus in and out of crypto. And I do think there's a good reason for regulators to focus on that. So people aren't using crypto and pulling it into the banking system and into currencies for funding the wrong things around the world. But I think part of the magic of it is this sort of like fast and cheap confirmation of any monetary transfer, agnostic to asking all kinds of validation questions about where it's going, why I'm doing it, and storing that data about my financial activity in some database going forward and trying to reason about what I care about in the world. And if we are able to ultimately build a monetary system where we're protected against the downside activity at the banking layer, but allow the digital money in between to flourish for productive economic activity and for rightful reasons, then I think ultimately we're getting there. And we're getting to sort of like the level of maturity we need to have in order for the average person to be able to use this, whether they care about the underlying protocol or not. And like I keep saying, I think we're really, really close to that.
What are the keys to make that more of a reality? So if crypto is in sort of an adolescent stage,
yeah,
what does the late adolescence, early adulthood look like?
There's three things that come to mind. One is most crypto products today have been built for crypto people by crypto people, right? With our very unique and idiosyncratic user experience expectations for interacting with this technology. So I think now a new wave of application developers that sort of build user experiences that are more familiar to existing patterns in the world for managing money and sending money, that'll happen. That'll happen over the next 12 months. So I think that's ultimately one thing that comes to mind. I do think we're a regulatory step away from sort of understanding how to deploy this technology throughout the world. People that are really trying to build this for right reasons have been open to regulatory guidance, which we haven't really received uniformly, certainly not in the US. But I think,
isn't that because regulators themselves have no idea what exactly they need to do? I mean, they're not really sure what cryptocurrencies are. They can't define it. They can't put it into the box that really helps them. So in one sense, they're tailing along the progress, the path of progress that you're making. And so it's an issue of timing, but it's also an issue of you're just completely out of sync.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are some that have become quite smart on the technology. It's just not a critical mass yet.
Right.
And obviously, just speaking within the US, there's a coordination problem between multiple agencies. So one might be quite smart and quite current on it. The other one might have its own incentives that are maybe at odds and might understand the technology or be thinking about it in a different way. And ultimately, that makes life a little bit harder for the developer community. Again, trying to do this for the right reasons, connected to the banking system for the right reasons, to understand how you do it. So I think we're still sort of a step slow on that. But maybe the ETF approval will accelerate many of those conversations. And so I think that that's one thing that needs to happen in order to like get us that breakthrough. I think you'll see a lot of continued development in the wallet space, in the non-custodial space, and in the DeFi space. That's experimental. But I think as far as building mature product experiences that not only touch crypto, but allow you to seamlessly get in and out of crypto from your bank, we're a big regulatory step short of that. And I think we're waiting on it. The best we can do today is adhere to the existing regulations about AML and money transmission. And most sort of application developers, at least in the US, are trying to do that. But it's a little bit of square peg and round hole.
Yeah.
And it really introduces a lot of friction for the average user trying to move into crypto from their bank or vice versa.
Well, it's a source of huge uncertainty on both sides.
Yeah.
Not only the users are uncertain about what they're going to expect, but it's got to be, as you're saying, it's got to be a huge pain as a developer.
Yeah.
Because you can do your best to adhere to existing regulations, but you damn well know that there's more regulations that are going to come down the road. And if you can't anticipate them, how do you do that? How do you actually continue to develop? I mean, with that level of uncertainty, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think that's why most of the innovation has been on what we call the non-custodial side of the product market, which requires a person to have a wallet that they manage themselves, that doesn't really touch the banking system, because there's uncertainty of sort of how you get in and out of the banking system itself. And that's where the developer community has continued to really flourish. Those are protocols. Those are experiments, right? These are when you hear the words tokens and DeFi, these are sort of people experimenting with online money, with a user experience that's fundamentally suboptimal for the average person, but that they understand, and that really keeps the progress of this space moving forward. But ultimately, to get this sort of like holy grail of mainstream adoption, this is a phrase I've been sick of for years, but again, we're still talking about it, mainstream adoption, you have to allow the average person to one-click tap and get their money in and out of the system. And if you are a developer, the best that you can do, if you're connecting to the banking system and trying to make this more accessible, is to add a compliance layer on top of your product that adheres to existing banking regulations. And those tools and those user steps are pretty well understood. We've worked on similar products ourselves, but ultimately, they not only add a lot of friction to your user experience, but ultimately you're subject to banking partners telling you how those things need to be implemented and adding rules on top of them that haven't actually been written into the regulations. And that's what's really made life difficult over the last couple of years, is you're trying to adhere to a regulation as it is. But ultimately,
I think that's a point I really want to emphasize here, is that so many developers like yourself are making good faith efforts here.
Yeah.
You hear so many bad stories about the bad seeds that are doing bad things, and they are doing legitimately bad things, but they're just the bad apple in the huge barrel of a bunch of developers who have not necessarily a unified vision, but a shared idea, and are doing as best as they possibly can in an uncertain environment with disruptive technology, which we all know is going to produce radical changes. But you're doing it on a good faith basis.
Absolutely. I think one major point that I would make to people is, you hear about some of the bad things that happened. The FTX collapses,
let's be honest, you only hear about the bad stuff.
But I've never been part of a more optimistic space and community. It's so impressive what people are building. It's so pure in a way. This is what I love about open source communities. They're so mission driven, and sometimes ideologically driven in different ways that they have to reconcile over time through code and through engagement. And it's just so impressive what's happened, even in the short space of time that crypto has been a thing. So I remain fundamentally optimistic. In spite of that, the application sort of developers' travails with regulators, if you're trying to touch the banking system, have gotten quite a bit more difficult. One thing that might be interesting for people to hear is regulations are made and imposed in sort of a layered way. And you receive legislation that authorizes regulators to implement legislation and rule make on top of that legislation. And those are things that are written in books that you can follow. But on top of that, there's sort of this third layer of regulation that most people don't hear about, that's sort of like discretionary rulemaking. And those are the things that aren't explicitly authorized by legislation that set forth some regulation that we have to follow. Those are interpretations of the regulation or the legislation that come after. And what's gotten a little bit more opaque and a little more difficult, especially in the US over the last couple of years, is there have been a lot of new interpretation, discretionary rulemaking on top of the stuff that's written in the books. And so if you're trying to build the right way, to build a regulated product that allows people to get in and out of crypto really easily, you can follow what's written in the books. That's well understood. BSA, AML, KYC regulations related to that, money transmission, if you're doing that type of activity within the US, those are well understood things to comply with. But what's been the moving target in the background, and you don't hear about very often in the media, is the discretionary changes that are happening in terms of how crypto projects in particular are expected to implement those requirements. And those tend to change on very short notice. So you as a product builder can spend 6 months building an effective compliance program to build a crypto-based product, one that follows all the relevant regulations, but you can be informed by a banking partner on a Wednesday that they interpret a certain regulation differently going into next week, probably because their banking regulator came to them and informed that opinion. And it can fundamentally change the way your product is built and needs to work, or it can fundamentally change the user experience. And you have to figure out on the fly how to ultimately comply with these sort of like moving target discretionary rules.
There is a lot more in depth and detail to my conversation with Ryne Saxe. And of course, I can't thank him enough for taking time out of his busy schedule to stop by and share his long career and all the insights that he's built up about cryptocurrencies and how to make them into useful currency. The very stuff that we talk about here at Eurodollar University. The rest of that conversation is available for Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And of course, if you want to become a member or subscriber, there's a whole bunch more there. Not only do we have other conversations, including more with those inside the cryptocurrency industry, but also just other financial luminaries talking about money and macro topics, theory, as well as the current situation and looking ahead to the future. On top of conversations, we've got massive amounts of content. We've got questions and answers, weekly recaps, classroom videos. What is a Eurodollar? How does it work? What is money? Theoretical considerations, investigating the history, putting it all together so that the monetary topic actually makes some more sense. And of course, we have research subscriptions, a daily briefing, and a deep dive analysis. What is actually happening in our current age, as well as what does it mean and what might it mean for the future. Eurodollar University memberships and research subscriptions got you covered for all the money and macro. And again, I can't thank Ryne Saxe enough for really getting into this cryptocurrency, the real bubble, which isn't about meme coins and cowboys out there selling all sorts of just crypto stuff. It's about real people working to make money useful, an alternate form of money than what we have now. I think you'll highly enjoy the rest of the conversation and all the rest of the stuff that is available at eurodollar.university. As always, I thank you for joining me. Till next time, take care.